Today is the law of forms. Sometimes I've referred to it as fun with forms, but I only said that because it's ironic. Because most people don't have fun with forms. Back in the old days, right, in the ancient days of real estate and teams, when I would do a career session, one of the things I'd do is I'd give everybody a questionnaire and ask them to fill it out. And I would tell them that their ability to complete that form was an indicator of their aptitude for real estate. You have to be able to fill out forms. And if we were to ask the question, what specific act does a real estate agent get paid to do? Right? If you're a real estate agent, do you get paid to show property? Now, I know there's some services that would pay you, $50, but as a general rule, do you get like $50 every time you show a client a property? No. Do you get paid for giving advice? Do you charge the client by the word or the hour, right? I'd be rich, wouldn't I, if I could charge everybody by the number of words I use. You don't get paid for giving advice. Do you get paid driving around? No, you don't get paid for driving around. Do you get paid for doing? No, you don't get paid for doing. What you get paid to do in real estate is eventually to have a buyer and a seller sign a contract. And I would add to that a good contract. And a good contract is not just a legal contract, but it's a good contract is a contract that the buyer and seller both want. There are many contracts that close in real estate. Melissa, I see, is on the call and can verify this. There are a lot of escrows that close where the contract is maybe a little shaky, where things are missing and they're throwing things together at the last minute to fix all the holes, but it still closes because the buyer wants to buy the property at that price and the seller wants to sell it. So before that, there are some other contracts. Let me just put it this way. If nobody's signed anything with you recently, you are not getting paid, right? It's that simple. No siggy, no money, right? So if we were to, and I know that, if you're at EXP, you're suffering from the up and the down, right? And what I mean by that is on the plus side, EXP has more training than any other real estate brokerage. By a lot. Right? On the downside, EXP has more training than any other real estate brokerage by a lot. And so sometimes you're just hit with this fire hose of information and classes and stuff like that. So if we're going to boil it down to what is the minimum that you would need to know in order to be able to conduct real estate business. On that, there's a few pieces of software. One of them is your multiple listing service. I get lots of calls from real estate agents who do not know how to search for properties in their MLS. I would learn that. RPR, they don't know how to run comps and things on RPR. And zip forms. And the zip forms is the software we use to sign stuff. So what happens is I get a call, it's Sunday, and an agent wants to write an offer, they want to respond to a counter offer, they want to have a buyer representation agreement, and they're contacting the team transaction coordinator, and she's not there answering for them on Sunday. Why? Because she has a life. That's why. Right? She's got a family, she's got a life, and she's not sitting around Sunday waiting for you to call her. And if you went to the broker room at EXP and you complained, hey, my transaction coordinator isn't writing contracts for me, they would say, stop it, they're not supposed to. You're supposed to write them. Right? That's what they'll tell you. So when we are helping you do this, it's like going a bit above and beyond what should be reality. And the reason we do it is because it's a lot easier. We have 10 escrows right now. I mean, we do it more often than you do. So, but you need to know how to do this on your own. If Sunday comes around, the transaction coordinator is not sitting around, and I'm probably available because I don't have a life, right? She does, not me. and you're stuck and you're going to have to write an offer and you're going to have to go meet a buyer, you need to know how to do this. Now, you'll notice in the emails that I send to everybody every week, I have links for Zip Forms training. If you're a member of the California Association of Realtors, they email you about Zip Forms training. If you Google searched, how do I find Zip Forms training, you would find it. You need to learn how to use Zip Forms. And you need to learn how to fill out the basic set of contracts, and you need to be able to do it on your own. You need to be able to do it on your own. All right. Enough preaching, maybe. So what I'm, it's, there, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop into Zip Forms. Right? Did that close? All right. So if you don't know where Zip Forms is, you need to take a class. You go into the California Association of Realtors, you click on Secure Transactions, the big circle, you click on Access Now, you wait for it to validate you. I need all the validation I can get. It pops up, right? And today we're going to talk about the first contract in working with a buyer. And the first contract in working with a buyer is a buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. So this is what the dashboard looks like. One of the things that you would want to create just to make your life easier is a template. I have samples, right? It's not that difficult. And the way you would create a template, let's say you're making a template for the buyer representation, and the buyer representation kind of template and the I want to buy a house template are very similar. But the buyer representation, the BRBC, notice that's not a choice, right? It doesn't say buyer representation, but we would go with new purchase or offer. And you could call this whatever you want, my BRBC. You could probably spell better, but I'm not going to keep it, so I'm not going to worry about that. I can't, I know, I need help. I know, I can't. So residential, do not automatically apply the template. If you've already got a template, you can, apply it, but we're creating one here. So the template opens up. So now what are you going to do? All right, it doesn't look like it's helping us very much. You're going to go to parties. This is the template. And the information you're going to want to put is the selling agent and broker. You put in your name. Do not do anything with agent ID. Put in your DRE number, your email, and your cell phone, right? The selling brokerage would be eXp Realty of California, Inc., or eXp Realty of Northern California, or you get the idea, whatever it is. If you're not at eXp, talk to me, right? Talk to me. You're making a big mistake. You put in the office DRE number. The full name of the broker doesn't appear anywhere, right? So you could type in Deborah Penny if you felt like it, but you're not going to see her name appear on very many forms, certainly not the ones we're going to go over. You're not going to use Office ID. Nobody cares about that. They want the email, go ahead and put it in. We have in the step-by-step guide to launching what to do after joining eXp, I have samples. That's not that difficult. The transaction coordinator has samples. You put in the broker phone number. Who uses a fax? I don't know, right? I don't know. I'm old, but I'm not that old, right? We don't put anything there. The street address is the corporate address of your broker, the zip code, and you hit save. Now, I've already got a bunch of these, so I'm not going to save it. So, and if you want to, you could add a document to your template. And the document you would add is the BRBC form, which notice is right at the top. That's how important this is, right? They put it at the top of Zip Forms, right? And if you do that, did I actually create a template? Sure. So I've created a template. I didn't fill out all the parties. I've added the form. By the way, putting in your information and the party's information takes the most time of this process. So there we go, right? So now that we've done that, we've created a template. So each time we do this, we're not having to type in EXP of California Incorporated and look up their DRE number and look up their address, right? You don't have to do that every time. You don't have to put in your information every time. All that information is already there. It's in the template. All you have to do is click on the button and it applies and fills out that part of the template. Easy peasy, right? So let's go to the dashboard, right? This is where you would generally start your journey. And what you would do, so let's say I'm signing a BRBC, which, by the way, I've done twice in the last 10 days with real life buyers. Doesn't that sound like fun? Let me see why won't it open? New transaction. Oh, thank you. Thank you. How about that? Is it just wanting to be slow today? Thank you. 2 e-signings and here, let me, that's weird. Dashboard, forms. There may be too many of you on the, here, let me just do this. Sometimes it didn't like me criticizing it. And Zip Forms has a mobile app. And if you fill out most of the information on the Zip Forms platform and you've downloaded the mobile app, let's say I'm talking to the buyer, I'm at Pete's Coffee, I've done my buyer consultation, they're like, yeah, we're ready, let's do it. I can, on my mobile app, send them this form for signature right then and there, right in front of me. All right, so let's go up to a new one. Here we go. New purchase or offer. This is for the buyer representation. Now, we don't have an address, but let's say our buyer's name is Sue, and her name is Sue Herman, right? And Sue wants to buy. Right now, we don't worry about that. I'm letting I have a software that thinks it knows what I want to put in. All right. So we put in the name of the buyer. Now, it wouldn't hurt if we wanted to make sure, because we've got so much going on, BRBC, that we've identified this is Sue's BRBC transaction, right? Because, we don't know if she's going to buy a house or not. Right now, we're just talking to her about working with her, right? We would scroll down and say residential. We would then pick the template. Remember the template? Now you can see I have a bunch of them. I'm just going to pick one and I'll click save. All right. So here we are, right? If I look at documents, this may have more. Here is the buyer representation and broker compensation. So what would I do now? I would make sure that under parties, where it says buyer, I would put in Sue Herman and SPERMAN at whatever.com. Right? Do I need to put in her home phone number, her business phone, and her cell phone? No. It doesn't. I don't even think there's even fields for it. Do I have to put in business fax? No. There's no field for that. How about street address, city, state, zip? No, you don't have to put in any of that. So you might, however, want to save to your address book, because what's going to happen, hopefully, is that Sue's going to find a house she really wants to buy, and you'll now be writing a residential purchase agreement, and you're going to have to fill out parties, which is her name and her contact information, and it would be really cool if it was already there and saved for you. So it just took seconds, rather than you going through your email, finding her name, copying her email address, looking for her phone, right? Rather than going through all that. Signing representative usually doesn't come up in the BRBC, but this is just like a generic form for somebody that's buyer oriented. But let's say Sue had an LLC. Now, we don't really need to worry about this now. The only difference in the BRBC, how about this? Who can tell me? Because we got a lot of smart people who study this online. Who can tell me what difference would it make in a BRBC whether or not the buyer was representing an LLC or not? Anyone want to impress me? I guess not. So the difference is that if the buyer is a human being, then California law says that you can't have a buyer representation agreement for more than 3 months. But if it's a corporation of some sort, then it could be up to a year. But I wouldn't worry about that. So we're not going to worry about that, right? You understand, right? And at this point, we're just talking to Sue. We're not talking to an LLC, and we're just going to hit save. Right? Why not? All right. So now we've got my information is in it, and Sue's information is in it. And if we click on documents, and yeah, it would be good for you to practice. My suggestion is, like you do, like I do, create a party, which is you. Right? Maybe a different email address than you normally use. So you create yourself as the agent, like it's real, but you make up a buyer, whatever you want with another email address, and you go through the process and send it to yourself for signature. And do that a few times so that you understand what they're seeing and what's happening, and you get good at it. And after you've done that a few times, now do it on your cell phone so that you're not having problems. All right, let me see if there's could somebody, Angela, are you watching I'm sure you're watching chat, and you're going to let me know. Would it be if you're doing commercial, would it be the LLC if you're doing commercial real estate? Laura, good question. No, it doesn't. The fact that it's commercial real estate doesn't affect the rule, right? The rule has to do, is the person signing the agreement on behalf of a corporation, or are they doing it for themselves? There are a lot of buyers, like investors, that are buying residential 1 to 4 as a corporation, an LLC typically, right? It's a lot, right? So it's not, the rule doesn't have to do with the type of property. It has to do with the type of buyer. Let's not worry about that right now. Is that all right? Okay. So now what? Well, we click on the form. And the beginning of the form is agency. You need to make sure that you checked the correct box. Don't leave it blank. If you don't, it makes it murky. Because, as I'm sure all of you know, the California Civil Code says that if the real estate agent doesn't make a proper disclosure of agency relationships, that is a defense against paying them. I'm sure you all know that. You mess up agency disclosure, and there's a chance you're not going to get paid, right? So we want to make sure we've checked the box. If there's 2 buyers, you check both of them. What if there's more than 2? Then it's going to be painful, right? Because then we have to use an additional signatures addendum. But at this point, we're usually not talking about all the buyers. We're talking about 1 person, or 2. Let's stick with that. Any questions about agency disclosure? By the way, you're supposed to explain this to clients. Right? Now, despite what many agents think, most buyers and sellers don't want to read forms. Right? They really don't. So what I always used to say, this is what I would say about agency disclosure, is that, first of all, this is not a contract. This is a disclosure form. A disclosure form is like an education form, right? It's for information purposes only. And what it does is it explains there's 3 kinds of agents. There's the agent who represents the seller. That's the listing agent. They have a fiduciary duty to the seller, which means they have to be faithful to the seller, and their responsibility is to get the highest price possible under the best terms possible for the seller. That's the listing agent. Then there's the buyer's agent. That's me. That's us. Our job is to get you the best price possible and the best terms possible. We're your agent, and our duty of faithfulness is to you. Then there's the double agent, I know you're thinking, don't they shoot them or something like that? No, we're talking about an agent who's trying to represent both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Right, which, as you could imagine, has its own issues. Do you understand this? Any questions about that? I'm just going, fine. We've done agency disclosure. The second page is the California Civil Code section, which says you have to put this in the contract, and it's something that they could read. And sometimes I would just say, if you have insomnia some night, try this, right? See if you can memorize it, right? You'll be asleep really soon. By the way, can anybody tell me at what point in working with a buyer is a real estate agent supposed to make agency disclosure? Now, this is an audience participation opportunity. I think I heard a voice.
When the relationship becomes more than casual.
More than casual. Very good, Mr. Pine. The specific wording is agent bears the responsibility. It says, I'll find it, but I may not want to spend the time to find it. The specific wording is when the relationship with the client is more than transitory in nature. That's what the phrasing is. Showing them property, giving them advice, setting up an auto email alert, not agency, running comps for them, gathering disclosures and sending it to them, certainly is more than a transitory relationship. All right, so here's the form. I know you're all thinking, get to the form, come on, get to the form. So date prepared, we usually are doing it the same date. It doesn't have to be the same date. I've actually heard trainers say that that date has to match the date they signed. Wrong, right? It's the date you prepare it. Why is it important? Because if we make modifications later, you'll notice on all the forms it refers to it, say the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement dated, and it's going to want you to identify the specific date of the form, right? Usually it's the day you're doing it, but if you set it up today and I don't meet with Sue until tomorrow, is it still good? The answer is yeah, right? This isn't the date you showed it to them or the date they signed. Representation period. Well, the most you could do is 3 months. So you could, I don't know, what did I do? It's been one of those mornings. So today is, how about February 6th? And now we go 1, 2, 3, and we put down 6. All right. Notice it says here, not to exceed 3 months. If representation period exceeds 3 months, this agreement is void unless a buyer is a corporation or an LLC. By the way, I had figured out one time, I've been a broker for a long time. I was the broker for a responsible broker for a 1,500 agent office. And it occurred to me that the agents were essentially paying us because we had actually read the forms, and they had, right? Way above 90% of all the questions that I would be asked on a typical day were answered in the form. But anyhow, just, so what type of representation? There's 2 choices here, exclusive or non-exclusive. If you don't check a box, it's non-exclusive. What does non-exclusive means? It means that they have the right. It's an open relationship, right? You're both dating other people, right? Not a commitment necessarily. So exclusive means that they're only going to be working with you. Non-exclusive really means, if you look at what the California Civil Code says, the word exclusive means, as it relates to real estate agreements, the definition is irrevocable. That's literally the definition. So what it means is that if it is a non-exclusive contract, they could see other agents, and they could cancel whenever they wanted to. If it's exclusive, they're not supposed to be seeing other people, other agents, and they can't just cancel because they want to. Now, of those two, which do you think it would be easier to get someone to sign? Probably the one that they could weasel out whenever they wanted to. I have two of these going right now. What did I pick? I left it non-exclusive. And the reason I do that is because I'm busy. And if the buyer doesn't want to work with me, I don't want to work with the buyer. Right? You understand? I don't forcing somebody. I mean, I don't have time for all that. If you say non-exclusive, and by the way, if they told me we want you to find an off-market property, I want you to go above and beyond. See, what the buyers I have right now, I've set them up on an email search. They want to go to open houses on the weekend. They've got Zillow and Redfin on their phone. They're not asking me to go out digging up off-market properties. If they were, it would have to be exclusive. Because now they're asking me to spend time, which I'm not going to do unless they've made an agreement to work with me, right? Property type. If you leave it blank, it's single-family residence. What about a condo? That's a single-family residence. What about a townhouse? That's a single-family residence. What about a mobile home? That's a single-family residence. What isn't? Well, a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, commercial property, vacant land, etc. Right? Not a single-family residence. So leave it blank, right? Counties and cities. If it's too broad, they could make an argument that the agreement isn't binding because there's, in contract law, a contract, it has to be definite and certain. And if you said anywhere in California, like you clicked on counties and typed in all of them, right? Everyone in California, well, they're going to say, nah. So and by the way, one of my buyers, they were interested, Santa Clara County, Santa Cruz County. They then said, well, gee, there's some stuff in San Mateo County. We modified the contract. Can you modify the contract? The answer is yes. Now we're friends. They like what I'm doing to help them. I mean, we're not friends, but they like what I'm doing to help them. They're not, thinking about maybe we need another agent. So they called me up and said, well, can we add San Mateo and Alameda to it? And I said, sure, we could modify it. But to start, we would probably put in something like Santa Clara as just an example, right? And you can see there's a lot of different choices. You could say, well, if they're in South Alameda County, like Fremont, a lot of times Milpitas, Fremont, whatever, they're all about the same. How about Santa Clara, San Mateo, and Alameda? There it all is. Sometimes the buyer might say, I only want to live in Redwood Shores, right? I only want San Carlos. I only want Pleasanton. Well, then you could put in the cities. This is not, in my opinion, a huge deal, other than you want to be inclusive enough that you covered where they might want and to live, and without being so specific, you're limiting yourself and have to keep modifying the contract. Additional buyer preferences and priorities, virtually never do we do anything with that.
Hey, Mike, I think Michael Pine has a question.
He does.
Yes, sir. Just about location, quick question. I noticed on the Zillow showing agreement, they have you basically create a template that gets sent out automatically if someone gets set up on a showing, and it defaults to just California. Would that stop us from getting paid?
Well, I doubt it. But that's so the Zillow showing agreement is not really a agreement to pay you compensation. It's a short-term agreement that Zillow wrote between you and the buyer so that you can make the argument that you have complied with we have to have something before we show the property But once I would then move from that to here. Why? Because when you write an offer on the property and you're in paragraph 3G of the residential purchase agreement, where it says in 3G3 that you are going to get 2.5, 2.25, 2, whatever it is you want, it's going to refer to the number that is written in on this form. And the listing agent is going to want to see a copy of a BRBC. They do not want to see a copy of Zillow's showing agreement. All right. So Zillow just did this so that they could argue that you complied with having an agreement before you show the, but at this point, you're not going to get, there's, in that agreement, there's no payment of a commission. That's
There is actually a commission field in it. It does have you put a commission
Oh, it
percent.
does. So they've changed it. Right. But I'm just saying that the purchase agreement that we use specifically refers to this one.
Okay, so basically, in a pinch, that's okay as a preliminary, but then just get this
You want
paperwork.
them to fill out this form.
Okay,
All right. You want them to fill out this form.
perfect.
The idea that this is good for California is probably not making it valid. But let me just get to your point, Michael. Let's say that it said California. The person that you're talking to buys a house without you. You find out. What are you going to do? Sue him? Hire a lawyer? Take the buyer to court? First of all, you can't do that. Only the broker can. So you'd have to go to Deborah Penny and say, gee, Deborah, they signed this agreement for the whole state, and they used another agent, and I want to sue him for my commission. And you can try and convince her to do this. And if so, first of all, they probably won't do it. I'm just saying. And even if they did, the buyer would hire a lawyer who would look at your form and say, this is not definite and certain, this is not a valid form. Right? Because Zillow doesn't really care about whether or not you get a commission as much as they care about controlling the transaction. I mean, obviously you have to get a commission to pay them the referral fee, but you know what I mean.
Gotcha. Thank you.
The contract refers to this form, and the listing agents want a copy of this form. Right, and this is the form we've been turning into escrow. Right. Jazz John.
Yeah, Michael, I have a question regarding the exclusive contract.
Yeah.
So I understand that means the buyer is only working with us.
Right.
But what does it mean for the agent? Does it mean that we are only working with the buyer?
No, it's not it's you get to date as many people as you want to, but they can only see you.
I see.
Right. I mean, you can have multiple buyers. You should. All right.
Okay,
Any other questions? And I haven't looked at the Zillow form recently, right? Because why? But you notice the gray paragraph, paragraph E. This is what I often refer to as the magic words. And by magic words, I mean the California Civil Code says that unless an agreement contains certain magic words, they don't say magic, but anyhow, certain words, that agreement is not binding if it involves paying a real estate agent a commission. So in order to be able to sue for a commission, you first of all, it has to be in writing, right? Why? Because the law says that. Number two, it has to have these magic words. The amount or rate of real estate commission is not fixed by law. They are set by each broker individually and may be negotiated between buyer and broker. Now, sometimes Zillow and even EXP or other general like national companies have their own language. I'm telling you, the California Civil Code says it's got to have these words. That's what it says. Doesn't say similar, a paragraph you wrote that says this. That's not what it says. It says these words. And if you don't have those words, you're not going to be able to sue for a commission anyhow. All right. Can everybody see why we want to use this contract? Okay. Agent compensation. Well, what would you put here? Now, I always say 2.5%. You could be 3.5, could be whatever you feel like it. EXP, by the way, does not have an opinion on what you put in. They have a minimum fee that has to be paid to them on a transaction. It's like $315 or something like that. It's 300 and something. It's not a lot, right? And if you don't collect that from somebody, then you're going to be paying it, and this will be a negative for you if you don't even collect that. But they don't care what you put in here, as long as they get their 300 and something dollars. Right? They don't care. So what I do is I say, well, the amount of the compensation, we oftentimes it's 2.5%. It's something that can be negotiated if we need to. We can't go up, but we can go down. Right, unless we modify the whole agreement, we can go up, we can go down. And so we will, in the residential purchase agreement, it's going to say that the seller is going to pay my commission, right? And many of you have heard me go through the commission explanation, but when I'm explaining it to people, because people, sometimes they say, how much are you charging me an hour? Right, I read on the internet that I have to pay your commission. I don't want to. And so what I explained to them is that prior to this rule going into effect, the seller paid the listing agent and the listing agent paid the buyer's agent. That part is changed so that the seller doesn't pay the buyer's agent commission to the listing agent, so the listing agent can pay it to the buyer's agent. The seller just pays the buyer's agent directly. But I'm telling you, despite all the anxiety that I felt as well, that, oh, maybe the commissions are going to drop. There hasn't been a significant difference in the amount of commission. And sellers generally want to pay a buyer's agent commission because they want to incentivize buyers to sell buyer's agents to sell the property. Right? And if for some reason 2.5% doesn't work, we can make reasonable modifications. I tell people, if I were pushed, this will not keep you from buying the house. It's not. Right? Put it in 2.5%. Could you do a flat fee? Yes. Could you have several properties? I guess. How would that work, and when would you do that? Anyone want to throw out something? Very good. Thanks for the feedback. Good point. Good point. I'm doing my own seminar here. So let's say your buyer is looking at new home subdivisions in an area, and there are 3 different builders, and they want you to go with them. Do you need this in order to be paid from a new home subdivision? The answer is yes. Answer is yes. So what would you do? Well, you would call the first one Toll Brothers, and you would say, hi, my name is Ryan, I'm a real estate agent. And I have some clients that are interested in your new home subdivision, and I was going to be bringing them by, this Saturday. And how much compensation are you paying to, a cooperating agent? And they say 2.5. Cool, write that down. You call the next one, Lamar, and you say, hi, my name is Mike, I'm a real estate agent, and I have some clients that are interested in your new home subdivision. I'm going to be coming by on Saturday, and I'm wondering how much compensation you're paying to a cooperating agent. And they say, oh, 3, we're motivated. All right, write that down. So do you understand you're going to be going there one day, maybe looking at 2, 3, 4 different builders, all of whom have different amounts, and you could create a list where you say, I want 2% from Toll Brothers and 2.5% from, you get the idea, right? That's typically where we see that coming up. Otherwise, we just leave it there. Paragraph E2 says that if the money is paid by somebody else, it relieves the buyer of the obligation to pay you. Right. And you point out in the residential purchase agreement, when we make the offer, we're going to ask the seller to pay me directly. Right. And continued right for payment. This is called sometimes called a safety clause, a broker protection clause, a continuation period. I usually just put in 30 days. You could put in 60. What this says is that, let's say I show people property this weekend on Saturday, and my agreement with that buyer is 2.5%. But they like the house and they're thinking, maybe we could find another real estate agent who doesn't want 2.5%. Maybe we could find an agent who only wants 1%. So Mike's agreement with us is non-exclusive. We can cancel it anytime. So why don't we do this? We're going to cancel our agreement with him. We're going to find somebody that and just say, hey, I already found the property. You want to get paid something, and then we'll buy the property with them and save money. How about that? Well, that's what this is to protect you as an agent against. Because it says that if you've showed property or negotiated on behalf of the buyer for property, and even if they cancel the agreement, if they within 60 days of canceling your buyer representation and broker compensation agreement, they buy said property, they owe you a commission. Right? And by the way, one of the questions that we would ask a buyer is, have you ever signed one of these things before? Before me, right? Because we might want to look at it. Cancellation, non-exclusive, they just have to say, we're done. You never return our phone calls. You don't return our text messages. We keep missing out on houses because you won't show them to us. We're finding somebody else. Or you could say after how many days? 7 days? I used to give them a week, right? Or you have to give me 1 week's notice, which slows down their momentum. If it's exclusive, it says for 30 days, or we could say we want 1 week's notice. If you say it can't be more than 30 days, why? Because the California Civil Code says can't be more than 30 days. But you could say, look, we're working together. I'm going to give you 110%. All I'm asking is that you commit to work with me during that period of time. What that means is that if you're driving around in the neighborhood and you see a for sale sign, you're going to call me to find out information about the property. What that means, if you're on Zillow or Redfin or Realtor.com or any of those apps, which I know you got on your phone, and you see a property you're interested in, instead of calling the agent who's next to that listing, who, by the way, is typically not a listing agent, but just somebody who paid for ads, instead of doing that, you're going to do a screenshot and send it to me. You understand? And they're like, yeah, that's not, you want to explain this to them so that they're not going around talking to a bunch of other real estate agents, right? But they're sending you the one so that you can negotiate on their behalf. And if for some reason but while I'm doing this, and I'm going to do everything I can to find you the right property, and we're looking for off-market properties, I'm going to be, we have exclusive listings, I'm going to be doing all this. And in order for me to be able to do all this work for you, you have to make a commitment to be working with me during the same time period. And if for some reason you decide that this has been a terrible, horrible mistake and you don't want me to be your agent anymore, you just need to give me 1 week's notice and we'll part friends. Or not. Right. Time to deliver buyer personal financial information. This, we haven't had this box checked very often, if ever. But what that would be if the buyer says, well, I don't have any money and I've got a VA loan because I don't have any money. I have an FHA loan because I don't have any money and I can't afford to pay you any money. Well, we're not going to ask for you to pay. It's going to be the seller. Well, what if the seller won't pay? And now you want me to pay and I can't pay. I can prove I can't pay, right? Now, what would you do? So we usually don't have the buyer give us all their personal financial information. I don't do that. No, I don't know if anybody on my team does. I doubt it. It's not common. But what we would do is have them go talk to a lender and have the lender tell us if they're pre-approved or not. Buyer doesn't have the money. That's really what I was going on about. If they don't have funds to pay, What do you do? Well, you'll say, well, the seller's going to pay me. Well, what if they don't? Well, then I can't represent you in that transaction. So when we write an offer in paragraph 3G3, we write in 2.5%, and the seller says, no, nothing, nada, you're not going to get anything. Then you can still proceed to buy the property, but I'm not allowed to help you. Well, what am I going to do? Well, you could get the listing agent to do it for you, who probably won't because he can't get paid either for helping you as a buyer. You could hire a lawyer to help you with the contract, but then you don't have any money, and that's probably expensive. This doesn't come up very often, but if they don't have any money and they're stuck on this, then you may not be able to help them. All right, so this is the grid, right? This is the part that you fill out. Now, the rest of it sort of explains what's going on. The part that I would call your attention to is paragraph 4, broker involvement. This is where it lays out what does it mean to be representing a buyer. Physically entered and was shown the property, right? Because remember when we put in 60 days, if you buy any of these, I get paid a commission. Remember that? Well, what 60 days from which properties? Well, properties that buyer physically entered and was shown by the broker. The broker showed the property to the buyer virtually. Now, that doesn't mean sending them a virtual tour. It means walking through the property, FaceTime, Google Meet, Zoom, and that sort of a thing. Not a recording that you send to them, but a live walkthrough. Broker submitted the seller a signed written offer. Broker performed a market analysis. You ran a CMA, used RPR. The property was introduced to buyer by broker or one for which the broker acted in buyer's behalf. Does that mean sending them a list of properties in the MLS? No, as it says, merely sending buyer a list of properties shall not be deemed broker involvement. The goal is not to be fighting with the buyer that wants to get away from you about you getting paid on property you did not sell them. Let me repeat that. Right. First of all, remember you sue them. Do you think, let's say you were able to convince Deborah Penny to hire a lawyer to sue the buyer on your behalf. Right? Good luck, but let's say you were able to do that. Do you think a judge is going to award you a commission on a property that you did not write the offer and help them buy? I mean, just think about that. Right. The chances are not good that this is going to work out. So we're not doing this to set up a lawsuit. Right. That's not the purpose of this. We're doing it because, first of all, we have to, and it gives us an opportunity to discuss the representation relationship and get their commitment to it. Most of this, they don't want to hear, they don't want to know, but you can read it yourself, right? Very few buyers are going to want you to explain every paragraph, right? That's rare, and most of it is self-explanatory. And if you're on my team and you have one of those buyers, let me know. Get me a Zoom call with them. Right, and I'll answer their questions, but this rarely happens. Rarely happens. All right, so that's the agreement. Buyer represent. In fact, look, it's asking for an address, but we don't have one. Why don't we have one? Because this is just a buyer representation agreement, and it's not. And I know it's. Why don't I just leave it blank? Why don't I just leave it blank? Because it wants me to write in something. Right, and so I wrote in something. They may change that at some time when they fix their software, but we don't have an address. Right, in zip forms, when it's sending something for signatures, it wants to make sure everything is filled out. I'll show you what I mean. It's possible they fixed it, but I'm not. All right, we'll see. I'll show you what I mean. So as we go through, broker compensation advisory. This is just a form that are paid in different ways. You are paid. PRBS, this is a form that says you might be working with other buyers. You might be working with other sellers. You might be representing more than one. And the we is really referring to your broker because you're just an agent of the broker. So is it possible that eXp Realty has other buyers in the area competing with your buyer, maybe for a house? It's possible even that you have a buyer that's looking for the same kind of property and competing. This says, yeah, that might happen. It's not our fault. Nothing we can do about it. Privacy Act is just a required one, and we are now at the end of the form. Right? Any questions so far? I see chat. I know Angela will tell me if I have to say anything. Given that you can't guarantee the seller will pay the commission, what is the dialogue you give the buyer? Oops, I lost it. Buyers to make them feel secure that most likely they won't be. We've done this. This is what I say hundreds of times. My team is going to close at least 10 escrows this month. Right. So we've hundreds of times, and every time the seller has paid the commission. And in fact, not only is this what's happening in reality, what's more likely is that the seller is looking for a way of communicating their willingness to pay a commission. How does the seller do this? How many of you have gotten emails that was about a property that had been listed, and in the subject line, it said 3%, 2.5%, or something? I get them. Right. And so what's happening is the seller says, how can we tell people I want to pay them if they'll bring me a buyer? How can we tell them that? That's more likely to be what the seller wants to do. The sellers, by the way, this is what I tell buyers, right? Sellers have always had the opportunity of not paying the buyer's agent commission. They always could have done that. They could have said $1 for years now. They could have said 0, but they didn't. They don't. Why not? And the answer is because they want to incentivize buyers' agents to sell their property. And if they don't pay the compensation through escrow, then that adds to the buyer's out-of-pocket expenses, which actually reduces their buying power and makes them have lower offers.
Hey,
But
Mike.
if this were to come up, we would lower our commission, but there's a certain point where I won't go. Question, I heard somebody.
Yeah, we have a couple. One from Dave, listener. He says, given that you can't guarantee the seller will pay the commission, what is the dialogue you give your buyers to make them feel secure that they most likely won't be charged this commission, since the current culture is that the listing side will pay the commission?
Well, I think I was talking about that, but it scares me that it wasn't clear.
Yeah, okay.
But that's the thing, is that we've done this hundreds of times. There was an article on, it's called Real Estate News, about a study that was done, and real estate agent commissions have not gone down substantially. And that we see more likely sellers are reaching out to let everyone know that they're willing to pay a cooperating agent compensation. And tell me what else you could do. Maybe I should just finish this. Could we call the listing agent in advance and ask them? Could we? Huh? How about that? You should call them, why not? So we could find that. Mr. Pine.
Yeah, good question. So would there ever be a way, say somebody's really spooked out? I know obviously we want to avoid this and just have a normal number, but say you wanted to do like a reverse escalation clause. Could you ever put in other terms, like if unable to secure 2.5, we'll reduce to 2. If unable to reduce to 2, we'll reduce to a floor of 1.5 type of thing?
Sort of, but not really. So are you allowed to have a schedule of commissions depending upon what you do or the kind of property? The answer is yes. But considering that the form is designed to obligate the buyer to pay you a certain amount, to say, well, only based upon what the seller is willing to pay, that kind of complicates it a little bit more. But the answer is you are allowed to have a schedule of commissions, but you're not supposed to necessarily tie that to what the buyer or what the seller says they'll pay. Laura has a question. EXP is a shorter version. Yes, they do. Would that be a better form? So let's say I were at an open house and I wanted to, and I had a printed out form I wanted to take. The CAR forms you can't really print out. The forms that EXP has, you can. They're PDFs. So you could print out a handful of them. And there's two EXP forms, a single property one and a general one, and they're short and they're only 2 pages long, and you could take them with you and you could handwrite them out with a stubby pencil or something like that, right? At the open house or in person with somebody. That's easier to do than the BRBC. If you're doing electronic signatures, now the EXP forms become far more complicated. I actually made a video on how to do it and just confuse people because you have to go to SkySlope and you have to learn how to use SkySlope, or you have to create a PDF and then you have to drop in the fields. Whereas the BRBC is hardwired into zip forms, easy to send for signatures. Right? Do you understand the distinction? If it's going to be signed electronically, this is the form. If you're there just with some paper forms, sure, take both of the two EXP forms. Mr. Charles wants to know, what about a house to lease? Is the agreement, the California Civil Code section, as well as the NAR settlement, does not include leases. Does not include leases. And I do believe, however, that CAR has a lease form, but this does not include leases. It's not a requirement. And yes. What if the seller is willing to pay less amount than what is in the BRC? What buyer agent do? What would the buyer agent do if the seller says 2.25 and your agreement says 2.5? We would modify the terms. So, and if you're thinking, how about this? We're gonna say, yeah, I'm gonna save the changes. Cancel. No, I'm gonna wait. I'll wait. Okay, we're gonna go back. I'll take a minute and do this. I know we're hit the end. You guys are all busy. So what would we do? We would go to add a form, go to forms, and one of them, if we type in buyer, and a financial homeowner identification, non-agency intent. I should have just wrote something a little easier. Yeah. How about disclosure and a modification to the buyer representation agreement? That form sounds like it might fit. So what we would do here, remember the dated thing that I was going on and on about? That's where we would connect it, and we would have to put in beginning to whatever, right? Whatever we were doing before. Oops, I did that wrong, but I'm not going to really, I'll just leave it here. And expiring, yeah. And so here we would do 1, 2, 3, 6. Scroll down and, oh, this isn't the right form. Why am how could I have done that? No, I don't want to. This is why I use our transaction coordinator too, right? Because CAR, the names of the forms have a tendency to. I might have to add, here we go. It sort of seems like that is the same title as the one I pulled in, right? But this is the modification of terms form for the buyer representation agreement. Notice one of the standard things is the amount of compensation. You just write in a new number. You could say it only applies to certain properties. You could add the location. You could change the property type. You could change it from non-exclusive to exclusive. Everything you need is there, right? Notice you could change the expiration date, right? Expiration date, amount of commission, counties, exclusive, non-exclusive. This is the form you would use to update it. All right, has everybody got that form? Only took me. It's confusing because there's another general modification of terms, but I don't know. This is the one that we use when we're changing stuff in the BRBC. All right. All right. Well, tell me something. Ask me something. Comments, criticisms, suggestions. All right. All right. Well, thank you all for showing up. What we're going to be doing next week. Oh, first of all, check out the 8 o'clock tomorrow morning meeting. It's a free session from Place. It's called an All Partners meeting. There's thousands of people on it. Next week, we're going to do what happens now. All right. And what I mean by what happens now is somebody assigned the BRBC, everything's ready. You're their agent. What do you do? Right. And this, how do you find the homes? How do you research the properties? What do you do before you show them? That's how do you show them? That's going to be next week. All right. So don't miss it.
Is there an invitation for that out, Mike?
It's in, I send all of you an email. The way you got into this meeting was from an email and a link, and it's in that email. You'll be getting
Okay.
an email Friday that has next week's information. Every
Thanks.
week. I don't do the whole month in advance because I'm afraid people would lose it and then they wouldn't know. So we do it every week. We probably could do both, but you'll be getting a link next week. Same time, different Zoom link.
Can we
All
take
right.
a minute and talk about something in the listing? It says additional compensation to seller's broker if buyer is unrepresented.
All right, well, we're going to be doing the residential listing agreement in 2 weeks, but what that's saying is what if the buyer says, well, I just want to go to the listing agent, I'm going to cut out the buyer's agent and then I will, So the listing agent in the past would double in the property because they would get the commission that was in the MLS for representing a buyer, but that's not there anymore. So the only way the listing agent could be paid extra is either if the seller agrees to pay the listing agent extra, or the buyer signs a buyer representation agreement with the listing agent and agrees to pay the listing agent. But the reason the buyer is going to the listing agent is because they don't want to pay an agent to represent them, right? So what most sellers are saying is, I don't want an unrepresented buyer.
Right.
Right. And so they don't want you to be paid extra to represent the buyer. The buyer's on their own. They have to do something. First of all, there's hundreds of things that you would do if you were representing the buyer. And if you're the listing agent, you ought to be paid for doing those things.
That's right.
Right. And 71% of litigation in real estate is when there is a unrepresented, where there's only one agent in the transaction. And I told sellers this, what will happen is if the buyer decides they don't like the house, they're going to sue. And what they're going to say is they didn't have an agent, they were kept from having an agent, that they didn't get representation, and they're going to sue. If they have their own agent and they're unhappy, they'll sue their agent. Not me, not you. Right? Isn't that better? So most of the time sellers don't want to pay anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's what that means. Any others? This is your chance to stump me with a question. Come on. All right.
Michael, I just had a question about the compensation. I know that we're not supposed to adjust it going up. We can only decrease it. But what if the new home builders are advertising a 4% commission for the agents? Should we just always kind of, I know 2.5 is kind of average. Should we just do 4% and then maybe decrease it if needed?
So first of all, you can adjust it up.
Okay,
It's just a question of when.
gotcha.
So let's say I'm doing the new home, and we've signed 2.5%, and the new home builder says 4.
Uh-huh.
Modification of terms, right?
Okay.
We're going to increase, and we could do it for certain properties. And we could say that one it's 4. What
Okay.
we can't do is, let's say ours says 2.5. We're writing up the RPA. We have not modified the BRBC, and we write in 4.
Oh,
Now we have a problem
Yeah.
because the BRBC and what is written in paragraph 3G3 don't match. One of them, the wrong one is higher. So that you can't do, but could you modify, as soon as you found out that that's what they're willing to pay, could you modify your BRBC to reflect it? The answer is yeah, you can do that.
okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. All right. I'm throwing in the towel. I'm giving up. Your questions are too difficult. I'll see you guys tomorrow on the 8 o'clock call next week. All right, be there.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Mike, one last question.
All right.
What if your buyer is late signing this agreement? The
If you show the
BRBC?
property before they sign the agreement.
No, I mean, you fill
finds
this out, and you have it ready to go, and it's dated, and it's all in car forms, and you send it to them electronically, and they just are slow to sign it and get it back. By the time they sign it, it's got a later date on it,
Later than what?
later than the date when you created it.
Well, as I mentioned, the date prepared is the date prepared. It's not the date signed. You
Perfect.
could prepare it today. It's like you cook a casserole today, but you don't eat it till tomorrow. Right? You know, it's the same concept, I think. I haven't had lunch, obviously, but
Might get sick. Mike, I don't want to get sick.
All right. It'll last for a few days.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
See you.
Thank
See
you,
you.
Michael. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.